Hey friends, I don't know how long you've been a part of the Nothing is Wasted community, but I know that you are someone who values seeing transformational changes that can come out of the deepest depths of sorrow and pain. I'm sure the stories you've listened to on the podcast have been an encouragement to you, perhaps in your own story, and a beacon of hope in the long journey of healing. Would you like to see that kind of transformation, that kind of hope arise in your own community? Well, we have just the way for you to be a part of what God is doing in not only your story, but also in the stories of those around you. Consider sharing with your local church pastor and leaders, or perhaps your small group leader, about the Nothing is Wasted Pain to Purpose course. This course is a proven pathway to lead people through grief, trauma, loss, tragedy, major life transition, and into hope, healing, and newfound purpose. And you could be the catalyst that starts that process in your very own church by simply starting the conversation with your church leaders and letting them know about the incredible impact this course has had on you and can have on your local church body. We have countless listeners who have approached us and asked us for resources to get the Pain to Purpose course launched in their church. I've had multiple personal conversations with people as we've been connecting with their church leaders. And you can do the same thing. You can learn more about this at nothingiswasted.com/churches. Again, nothingiswasted.com/churches. And reach out if you have any questions on how to get the Pain to Purpose course started in your local church. With the right tools, real healing can happen in all of our stories and in the local church body that we attend and that we serve in. Don't wait. Learn more now about bringing the Pain to Purpose course to your church today. Hello, welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Davey Blackburn, and joining me
is Aubrey Sampson, your other host.
And I feel like you never know these days, right? We're like,
I know, it could be Eric Schumacher, it could be Ken Roberts, it could be Vanitha. Yeah, that's fun. That's fun. Expanding the territory at Nothing is Wasted. Good times. Yeah, it's.
Speaking of expanding territory, Tasha Jun.
Okay.
Aren't you excited about this, Aubrey?
I am a Tasha Jun fan, like a fangirl.
I know you are.
Like her book, she has a new book out called Tell Me the Dream Again. And she's a biracial Korean American follower of Jesus. The book is remarkable. Like I could not put it down. I'm a writer. It's a writer book, meaning like it's just beautiful, but it's for everyone. Like even if you're not a writer, grab her book. But she reflects on family and belonging. She reflects on ethnicity. She reflects on this kind of place in her that was like aching for the shalom of Jesus through her story, through not feeling like she belonged in all the spaces she was in because of her ethnicity. And Jesus met her so beautifully, like in her Koreanness and in her Americanness. And all that to say, I'm a fan. And also she's a friend. We become friends. Yeah. We're in the same Writers Guild and we become friends really because I started as a fangirl. But you're
like, hey.
Yes. So I was jealous that you got to interview her, not me, but also excited for our Nothing is Wasted audience to get to know Tasha Jun B, because she, just a beautiful, beautiful soul.
Yeah, no doubt. It's great when you read, I understand totally what you mean, like a writer's writer. It's like the way, the flow of the syntax and that you're just like, man, you can just kind of like, and it almost feels, I think of it like a Wendell-Berry. Like when I read Wendell-Berry, I'm just like, oh my
How
goodness,
do you do it? Yes.
Wow, like you somehow have taken me on this journey and you've pontificated enough that I'm wrapped all up in this whole thing, right? Like it's not just like straight to the point didactic. Some of you guys, you're out there, you're probably Enneagram 5s and you're like, I just want
give me the info.
Right? But those of us who like to get wrapped up in stuff, right? We like to just kind of immerse ourselves, marinate it in a little bit. You do that. But then there's like, they bring it home into this where you're like, whoa, it's just this profound flowing beauty. That,
art, really. Yeah.
Yes. And Tasha's very similar. I mean, when we had this conversation, you can tell like she just is so thoughtful about things. And she takes a subject matter that many of us wouldn't think about. We wouldn't, we would be a lot of times the race and belonging conversations, it gets reserved for one particular race in the United States, and that's Black Americans, right? And that's what, that has been so much featured. But there are so many other minorities that are also wrestling with this sense of belonging. This is near and dear to my heart because my wife, Christy, is half Korean. And she has told me, I share a little bit this in the conversation with Tasha, but she has told me some of the experiences she had growing up in a very white community that opened my eyes up to that, and the truth of the matter is this is a very apolitical comment. So I'm not trying to, but there for whatever reason, we know some of the reasons, but there is a rise in like anti-Asian and Asian hate crimes that are taking place.
I talked about this in my book, Davey.
Nation.
The rise is like over 100%. It is absolutely an evil attack. I think it's demonic. I think it is an evil attack against the children of God, specifically East Asian people, South Asian people as well, but specifically in the middle of 2020, East Asian people. We know why it happened. I don't even... I don't want to defend it. I think it's evil. I think it's wrong. I think it's demonic. And she felt that in her church experience. Yeah.
It absolutely is. And and honestly, because of the political stuff that is going on globally between specifically China and the United States and the global rise of those superpowers, I believe we're going to see this more often, unfortunately. Yeah. So we as the church are going to have to be prepared. Right. We need to know how to deal with this in the same way we should have known how to deal with the race conversations back in 2020 with the George Floyd thing, but we didn't. We fumbled the ball with that. And so, now I'll get passionate about it because I turned to Christy at one point and I was like, hey, I'm concerned about this. Are you concerned about this? Because this is very near and dear to me. And so Tasha does a phenomenal job of illuminating this for us in just a very gracious way. Just like, hey, here was my experience. And I think it's very helpful for all of us to hear about this.
Yeah, I think so too.
And to be very aware of what's going on in our nation.
Cannot wait. Let's we'll invite you to do all the things we love inviting you to do. Be sure to like and follow us at Nothing Is Wasted Ministries. Rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts to help others find these inspiring stories. But most of all, we just want to let you hear from Tasha Jun. So let's go ahead and take a listen to Davey's conversation with her.
Well, Tasha, it's so great to have you on the Nothing Is Wasted podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, I told you right before we started recording that I lament the fact that we weren't doing this in person because I just found out that you hail from the same general town that I do.
Yep.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your family and what you do? And then I'd love to dive into this book that you've just released. And man, I'm so excited about this conversation because it's something that's near and dear to my heart too. But go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So my husband Matt and I have been married for almost 18 years. And we've got 3 kids. They are 14. Oh my goodness. He would be so mad if
it's hard to keep up, isn't it? Right?
Yeah. 14, 11, and 8. And we've lived here. I went to high school here. I went to college at IU and then did not live here for a while. And then my husband and I actually moved back when our oldest was about 1. So we've been here for a little while now.
That's awesome. Well, in this book, Tell Me the Dream Again, you are talking quite a bit about living between two worlds. Mm-hmm. And this is, like I said, very near and dear to my heart because it's something I was aware of, but wasn't so closely connected to until I married Christy. Mm. And then hearing some of her story and hearing some of her background, her mom being adopted out of an orphanage in South Korea. And then even growing up for Christy in the south side of Indianapolis, kind of feeling like she didn't know where she belonged, being biracial. And so you have a very similar journey. Yeah. And so I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about some of that. Talk about what you've, really are addressing in this book and where you found some of those tensions and those pain points as you were growing up trying to figure out where you fit in.
Yeah. When I was really young, my mom grew up in Korea. She immigrated to the States when she was in her 20s. And when I was really young, it was just very clear to me and very normal that I have a Korean mom and a white dad, who grew up in California. And I mean, from the way that our table spreads looked to just the way that they communicated, it was being biracial and having two worlds in the home was the norm. It was more so when I went out into the world where I started to question, is this normal? What my norm was, like, suddenly became something that I was very aware of, that it wasn't normal everywhere else. And growing up, in my younger years, we moved all over. We lived in California. I was born in California. We moved to New York, to Wisconsin. And then for most of my elementary school years, lived in Japan, and then moved back to California. And so in all of those places, most of them at least, it was very diverse. And it wasn't until we moved from California to Indiana, right before I started high school, so to Noblesville, where I experienced like the most culture shock of my life. And I think the age had something to do with it. But that was the first time, as I said, that when the outside world looked very different than what my norm was, that was the very first time I was really aware that my normal is not normal here. And just became very, very insecure, wanted to hide from all of that. And without even having like the language for it, it just was my body, and, my mental response was to hide. And so there were a lot of reasons for that. I mean, I think my first day of school, I had people just come up to me in the hallway and say, and your wife maybe experienced some of this too. I think because being mixed, it's hard to tell sometimes, what our ethnic makeup is, especially in a place that is very homogenous. And so, and was so even more at the time. But, people that just were like, are you Mexican? Are you the new Chinese girl? Are you from Hawaii? Do you know how to surf? I mean, just really weird questions that, on the surface, I think they were curious. Yeah. But I think the message, the message I took in is that, it's okay for people to question me, to have questions and bring them to me based on my appearance, and just felt very othered. And so, I mean, just started hiding as much as I could from that point on without even realizing that I was doing it.
What did that hiding look like? I mean, how did that manifest itself?
Yeah. So, I mean, there were a ton of little things that I look back on now and remember. I'm like, I was, really hiding there. In the prologue of the book, I kind of talk about when a friend wanted to come over, and I was so nervous about having people come into my house. And I mean, I did have friends that came over in high school, but I just, I remember this person was going to come over, and looking around my house, trying to like open the fridge to make sure it didn't smell too much like kimchi. Cause I mean, in our home, it was very Korean. My mother, she always cooked Korean food. It was like it felt Korean there.
Which is amazing. I mean,
and it was normal.
Absolutely love Korean food, by the way. And kimchi is so good for you, especially your gut health.
It is. So, I mean, I just remember suddenly being nervous and looking around the room and noticing all the things that marked me and my family as Korean, and wanting to hide it. And I couldn't move enough of it. So I ended up saying, I have to do something. I can't hang out,
Right.
So there were just a lot of things like that, just trying to avoid that part being shown.
Right.
Yeah.
My wife tells some similar experiences too. I wish she was actually on this
call.
You guys would really have such a great conversation about this. We'll have to do this again and let you guys talk about this. But I mean, she shared some stories with me about how she's sitting with a group of friends growing up, and one of her friends has this aha discovery that she is half Korean, and she literally looks at her without even just like spouts out of her mouth like, "Wait, I thought you were normal," is what she said.
Yes.
And you're like, well, hold on, like,
yes.
And I hear you earlier. You said like, I'm sure that most of it was out of a genuine curiosity or just like a kind of an ignorance, not in the pejorative sense of the term, just like being unaware, right? But
right.
But at the same time, like what you said, it can make, when you're on the receiving end, make you feel very other.
Yeah.
And someone who is a white male, right? I mean, it's it can be very. Sometimes, especially like, a few years ago during the George Floyd thing, and all these conversations are coming up as we're talking about, okay, how do we step into this and experience life through the lens of other people as well, without having lived life in their experience? I'm curious, as you reflect back on that, what were some ways that you wish people had engaged with you or had interacted with you?
I always, tell people, I think you can tell when someone is being curious out of a desire to know you. even if the words come out kind of funny, I think that we can feel that, where there's a humility there, just a desire, like a curiosity, like, yes, this admittance that, yes, I don't know something. But I do want to know you. And I mean, maybe in junior high and high school, we're still learning all that, right? Everyone.
Right.
But I think there's a difference between that and feeling like you're very much on display. And I think that people feel, when people feel like you owe them an explanation for your existence or your appearance, I think that feeling is so different. It feels, I think that's where the othering comes in. And so I have never minded if someone is asking me something and it seems like they are just curious. And, maybe just they're okay with admitting the fact that they don't know something,
Right.
So, and I think in some of those negative experiences too, where someone's curious, it feels like they are admitting without knowing it that they have kind of taken in, maybe they don't even know how or where it's come from, but kind of taken in all these stereotypes and believe them, and so in the way that they address someone, it comes out, So
right.
it means saying, are you normal? Or I thought you were normal. Your wife's friend saying that, just even like that underlying belief that there is a normal and that
Right.
it's, from their majority people group, so
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't help that we are already as in the United States of America, we're so geocentric, right? Just in terms of like our political, outlook and our position globally, and right, and so it just feeds into this really biased, type of ethos when it comes to white Americans, especially, and we just don't even we're so ignorant about how especially like in the church, the kingdom of God is really reflected.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for you, as being biracial, can talk about maybe some of the even distinct tensions there of that and the distinct emotions that you felt in some ways seemingly in two different or multiple different worlds and cultures.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I talk a lot about just, like when we first went back to Korea as when I was a kid, I went back thinking, this is going to be home, this is the stuff that, we eat. The stuff that we eat is going to be everywhere. And, and it was incredible to go and watch my mom navigate through the streets of Seoul, bargaining with people in like street markets. And I had never seen that side of her in her own language, so comfortable. So that was like, there was this beautiful piece to that. There's this beautiful piece to feeling like, yes, this is all so familiar and there's an abundance of it here. On the other hand, there were a number of things that happened that where, there were locals, like there was a time where a bunch of like teenage Korean boys came up behind my sister and I were spitting on us because we were half Korean, which was very much looked down upon because of the U.S.'s involvement in the war and just everything. There's so many layers, right?
So you were experiencing it from not just the United States, right? Americans, but you were experiencing it as well from.
And so I think experiencing that and feeling like, oh, I don't really belong here. But I feel so at home. This is my home. So like this desire, this tension of like wanting to prove that I belong and also wanting to run away, was very much present. So that was really confusing. I think feeling like, gosh, I'm in this middle place. My sister and I, we don't fit anywhere. And then even growing up and like, we didn't go to church, but we didn't go to church regularly, I should say. We had little spurts, but it was really hard because my mom felt most comfortable in a Korean church. My sister, me, and my dad, none of us spoke Korean. And so at the time, if you went to a Korean church, if you wanted English, you had to like wear headphones. I don't know how it is now. I mean, it just probably depends on the area. And then we would go to, a more like Western style majority white church. And my mom would go, but would never really fit in there. And so I think a lot of times we just didn't go. It was just kind of painful, and I think there was this wanting to blame, like, whose fault was it, that we didn't fit in as a family. No one said that, but you just kind of felt it. And so I hated going. I did not want to have anything to do with it because it was so awkward. It was like our family just felt like a sore, so I don't even know if I answered your question. I went off on a tangent.
No, absolutely. No, that makes so much sense. Both like you're straddled between two worlds, and you're trying to figure out, where do I belong? And I don't feel like I belong anywhere.
Yeah.
And then who's to blame for that? And to the degree that you feel comfortable sharing, did that create any tensions or resentment within your family unit? I mean, and if so, how did you guys navigate that?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it was underlying and just, it would come out in really weird ways. But I mean, for a while, it was really hard with my mom and I, because I felt like anytime I started to feel like I belonged elsewhere, it was no one knew that this was happening, really. Maybe they did. I don't know. But most of my friends didn't know. But I felt like it was me cutting a part of myself out, which included my mom, And so,
Right.
it felt like there was just a break in our relationship. It was very difficult. And then when I got a little older and I would go closer to her, I felt very defensive of her. And so if I was ever in a situation where I felt like someone was doing something, that could be stereotypical or racist or hurtful towards her, I felt very like there would be a wall that would immediately go up. So, but I think the hardest thing was that it affected my relationship with my mom. So for years, we weren't close. And I think I blamed her, even though it wasn't her fault, and so, and that's kind of like where there's a lot of pain for me. Like I look back and think like, gosh, like, and we are now a lot closer. There's been a lot of mending, but when I think about all of those years, I'm like, gosh, I missed out on a lot, like having her close to me as I was growing and, becoming an adult,
Yep.
So, yeah.
It often is not talked about, or, we often are talking about some of the racial divides between white Americans and Americans of color, specifically Black, right?
Yeah.
That's what gets discussed quite a bit in public forums or private forums. But, what I've discovered is that, especially like, Americans of Asian descent, that racial bias doesn't get discussed very much either.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to observationally, especially as I'm now like married to Christy and kind of seeing some of that, and my eyes are being open to some of that, trying to go like, why is that? What's why is that not being talked about? And recently we've been seeing some things in the news of Asian hate crimes and things that are happening and occurring. And of course, the narrative is in a lot of ways connecting it to COVID and to, different, who's culpable for that. Is it China? Like, and without getting into politics, I'm curious if you have any kind of like insight into why does it seem like we talk about this with one race, but we're not really having the conversation when it comes to Asian Americans or Hispanic descent or, all of these other minorities that also make up, the fabric of who we are as Americans.
Right. Yeah. I am not an expert by any means, but, and I think, some of these things are kind of blanket statements, but, Asian Americans have often been called like the model minority, in such a way that, is really damaging, because I think, a lot of us, and honestly, Asian Americans are the most diverse group of, ethnicities. Like there's so many, and we're so different, like, economically, like everything is really diverse, but a lot of times, people are only focused on East Asians as, the kind of face of Asian America. And we're kind of known to kind of, I think the message has been given to a lot of us, not all, but a lot of us to, put your head down, assimilate, try to be invisible. Which plays into whether or not we're showing up in those race conversations or even just sharing our stories. And then if you look at the history of Asian America, and I always recommend the PBS documentary, Asian Americans. It's phenomenal, just talking about Asian American history. It's phenomenal. It covered so much, but it really talks a lot about just, even in the beginnings, there was the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was, the only law put into place that directly targeted like an entire ethnic group. And we weren't, Chinese Americans weren't allowed to come to the US. Were banned from it. And even and this was, and then also like the Chinese railroad workers that, helped build the railroads. And I write about this in my book. There's this photo, and I as I was watching the documentary, the PBS documentary, there's this photo that was taken, and all the Chinese men were cut out of it. And so I just feel like it plays into this, like we can erase them. They're going to be quiet. They're going to work hard, which is such a stereotype, but just plays into this invisibility. And I think a lot of our either parents or their parents were kind of told, to survive, you're going to have to be quiet and just put your head down and just try to blend in, which you can't, but, just do that as much as you can. And so then we have this model minority thing that's come out from it, which I think some Asian Americans want to play into because it feels safe. But it really is kind of used to kind of pit us against other minority groups. And it's just super damaging.
Can you explain that a little bit, the model minority concept?
I think it comes up in politics a lot, and I don't want to get into all that, but it just comes up in general as like, Asian Americans, they're going to come and try to assimilate as much as they can into the majority culture. They're going to work really hard, not cause any problems, be model citizens, so that we can continue to let them come here. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to, play by all the rules.
Yeah. Yeah. So it seems like there's some messaging that's coming out from sectors of politics or, culture that's saying this is the example of what a minority should look like and how they should behave, so to speak, when they are assimilating into United States culture. Wow.
Yeah. And so I think there are some that feel safe in that. Yeah. But then I think others, and I experienced this just a tiny bit, like the minute I started to express anything or show any anger or just grief, it's like, that's bad, because that's causing a ruffle. And so, it's hard. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we talk a lot about here on the podcast how important it is to talk about grief and express that and lament and, for many of our situations, the tragedies or the trauma that we're walking through, it's not necessarily, I mean, there are definitely a lot of situations where people are being told you don't need to talk about that. Right. And so for whatever reason, the propensity for many of us is to stuff it or suppress it or just kind of like put our head down and keep going. And there's a variety of different reasons for that. You bring up a really interesting nuance that I hadn't really thought about, but from the standpoint of you trying to express that in terms of just feeling like you don't belong because of your ethnicity. And so how have you begun to, if you have, how have you begun to like sort through that and find those spaces to be able to express that grief?
Yeah. It's been over a long period of time. I was just telling someone the other day, in high school, when I was in this period of just hiding, I had an English assignment due and I was like procrastinating and finally just wrote something. And I was really upset about something. I don't even remember what, but I was upset about something that had to do with living there. And I wrote it really angrily. And I never did that, maybe in my journal, but I never did that in a public way to express it. So I just turned it in.
Because you were the model minority.
Yeah, exactly. Turned it in. And then my teacher, like a couple days later, I saw him standing at the front, talking, like he was handing our papers back. And I saw him hold on to mine. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to like really be terrible, but he ended up really affirming, I guess, the honesty in it. Wow. And I was mortified because, he read like a line of it. He didn't read the whole thing at the time. I was like, thank God. But it did something in me, I think. It did something in me to kind of say, writing is a safe space for you. And I knew that kind of in my journals, but I think I even held back some in my journals. So this one was just really raw. I feel like it was almost God that had me just turn it in because I look back, I'm like, I can't believe I turned that in. Wow. But it did something for me in saying there are people who will receive your raw anger, that it's not all bad. And so it took years, I think, for me to keep doing that. But it was this message, it was this marker for me that was like, okay, this is not all bad. Expressing what you're really feeling is not all bad. There's something good there. And I didn't think much beyond that. And then later in college, I started writing. And every time I would write in, creative writing classes, a lot of it was fiction. But of course, even in fiction, the truth comes out, like what you're going through comes out, the emotion comes out. And it was, again, really affirming. And so I think it was this message. There are safe places. Writing was the tool and the path for me to really get it out, because I didn't feel comfortable saying things, face to face at the time. And I think it was really healing for me. A lot of those environments were not Christian environments. They were, so that was something I had to kind of wrestle with. Like, why is this so hard in faith environments? Why does everyone want me to tidy up my story or not tell it? Unless I have it fixed, or I feel total peace, and I wasn't there, and I'm still, there's still a lot of pain. So anyway, so more recently and throughout the pandemic, I have started gathering a group of Asian American women. That was kind of out of desperation of just feeling like, with my kids, when I had my kids, like, I need other Asian moms, like, around my kids. Like, not that that other women couldn't. I had a plethora of others and they're wonderful, but I really felt this need, like, how do I pass on what I have to my kids? And I had no one. So, so I started gathering these women, and I found that we met outside once, and we just had a time of lament. We were all feeling pains about, different things. Some of our kids had been spit on, called names like chink, even though they're not Chinese, and not that it would be okay if they were, but just, because of what was going on with COVID. And we're all from 7 different churches in the greater Indianapolis area. And we were just going through a lot of pain, and we felt really alone in it. Because it's like we couldn't bring it up because people would say we were being political, or just people didn't even know that this was happening. And so we had a time of lament and just kind of expressed our pain. And so that was verbal, but it was so necessary, to do that together in community, to have a space where we were just open with our grief, and it was okay, and no one was going to tidy it up or say, everything happens for a reason, or, we could just sit in it and be together. And that was also just another moment of okay, this is a moment of shalom, a step towards wholeness, for all of us. And this is church, in my backyard, this is church. Yep. So, yeah.
Man, that's amazing, Tasha. It's interesting that you say that what you've experienced with the church when in regards to, your journey is until your story is all tidied up and it's not messy anymore. Or if it is messy, then at least you've got peace about it. There's really not a forum here to talk about it. And we've definitely experienced that in all different fronts of pain, that the church, for whatever reason, struggles with the uncomfortability of expressing pain that is not, quote unquote, resolved or redeemed, as we would put it in church terms, or somehow, we're not in it anymore. And so we end up telling our stories or we don't tell our stories when we're in the middle of it.
Right.
And it can become very isolating for so many people. And so what ends up happening is people tend to go outside of the church to find healing and wholeness. Yeah. And then they come back into the church. And, that doesn't sit right with me. I know it doesn't sit right with you. As someone who's a pastor, that's something that I'm like, man, we've got to change. We've got to figure out how this is not the culture or the reputation of the church. Yeah. How does healing happen inside of it? How are people able to express this and lament inside the church, and the church holds space for that? In your experience, what would you say? If you were sitting in front of a panel of pastors, we were just at a pastors conference last week, Tasha, where we have a course called Pain to Purpose. We launch it in churches all over. It is an effort to help the church create environments where healing can be fostered, where people can come share their stories and talk about it. And we had 145 churches last week that said, we want to launch this course, which is amazing, right? But it shows you there's a huge need. Well, imagine you're sitting in front of these 145 pastors. Yeah. And you want to really bring to light, hey, here's what I've observed when it comes to the church, my own experience. What would you say to them? And how would you help them to maybe make those adjustments or those shifts?
Yeah. I think, first I would bring up lament, just the importance of lament. And I think a lot of churches are catching on to the importance of it, but it's this quick mention or a sermon or two on it. And I think I've experienced, as I did, in my backyard, that lament is also worship. and that it's a pathway towards intimacy with God. And I think,
sorry to cut you off, but isn't it interesting that we don't have like a lot of worship songs that reflect lament?
Right.
And like everything that we sing is typically like triumph, or
I know, everything is like,
it always resolves itself. All the songs seem to resolve themselves in some point, but there's like, where's the one that's just like this? I mean, everything is coming down on me right now.
Well, and there's so much in the Bible, so it's not like we don't have a guide. Like there's so much lament. So I think for one, like focusing on that and really like giving space for that and kind of guiding people through that. Like the thing that we had in our backyard, it was so simple. We had like one quick liturgy, and then there was just space, because I think grief and lament need space and time, and it's going to take the time it takes, and so, but there's such a fear of that. So maybe even addressing the fear of sitting in it. I don't know how old you are, if you've seen Neverending Story, or if where the horse, where the horse drowns and he never comes back up. Like that was so painful to watch as a child. But I think the fear for a lot of people is that if they sit in there for lament for any amount of time, that they won't come back up, that there's no way out. But I think the opposite is probably true. Not the opposite, but I just think covering it up is going to be worse, like in the long run, more painful in the long run. So I think addressing that fear, because we all have it. I think everyone's afraid of, no one wants to be sad or, and I'm even like melancholy bent, but like, I still don't want to sit in things, So addressing that fear, like we're all in this together, we can be scared together in it, that's okay. And then also, I guess really doing the work to study how they can like make it lead in that way, maybe lead in lament and also give space for it. So
that's good.
And there's a lot out there. And also I think too, like looking at some, global ways of doing things, because it's, I don't think everyone has just victory songs all the time, at church. I think that there are maybe other places where they sit in that a little bit better, and we can learn from them. So
yeah, I agree. Just as an example of that, anecdotally, my dad grew up in Haiti as a missionary's kid.
Okay.
And I remember when he took me back there, I watched a funeral procession. We're driving down the road and I saw this funeral procession, and I saw like this group of women who were just wailing behind this funeral procession. And then I discovered that's part of their culture. It's like they actually have a set group of people, which actually then later learned that reflects even Jewish culture, that the sitting Shiva, that there was a set group of people that would come and just weep on behalf of the loved ones that lost their loved one. And so it's like other cultures understand it better than us, but for whatever reason are pull yourself up by your bootstraps and keep going kind of Western American mindset just keeps us from sitting in that in the time, in the space that we need to sit in it, right? Like weeping well without wallowing, finding that tension there.
It was actually part of another book collaboration led by Natasha Sistrunk Robinson. It's called Voices of Lament. So I have a poem in there, but it's a collection of liturgies and essays. And she starts it with talking about, it's all like liturgies and essays and poems based on Psalm 37. But she also starts the beginning talking about how, in Jeremiah, it says that the wailing women were going to lead their people through this grief, and those were going to be the leaders. And so that's just such a weird thing in our culture, right? But but that's what would lead, that wailing. You mentioned wailing, so I thought of that. But
that's so good because it's a picture of the upside down kingdom. Right. It's the picture of, it's the same. I get the same image when I see, in 2 Chronicles, they're going to put the worshipers on the front lines of the battle. It's like, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever rationally. Like, how is this going to lead us? But Scripture says not by power or by might. And so you've got this upside down kingdom that says, no, we're gonna lean into the Lord and His strength and His provision in all of this. And that's what lament does, is it opens us up to let God step in to our pain. And I'm curious, even as I say that, where you have been seen, where have you seen God really step in to this in your story? What are some, because I imagine there's a lot in your story of wrestling through identity. And I believe at the core, everybody's journey with the Lord is a journey of identity. It just takes on different shapes and forms. What's yours been like in that? Hey friend, I just want to take a quick moment to let you know about something we offer here at Nothing is Wasted Ministries. Now listen, Nothing is Wasted is not just this podcast that you've been enjoying, full of stories of hope and healing in the midst of difficult and painful valleys. We're also a ministry with unending resources that can help you move forward on your healing journey from whatever pain you've experienced in life. We've got the Pain to Purpose course, master classes, curated pathways around specific pain points, an online community, and so much more. But if you're just getting started on the path of healing and you're interested in learning more about how you can even begin to untangle your pain, I want to invite you to our free live 5 steps to taking back your story Zoom call. I'll be there live, and I'll just be sharing some practical steps that you can take right here, right now, to move from the hurt and trauma you've walked through and into deeper healing. You and I will be able to engage with each other. You'll be able to ask questions and learn what it looks like to start taking back your story. Now, it's completely free, but it may just be the step that God uses to begin in you a journey of deeper hope and healing no matter what you faced. All you got to do is sign up at nothingiswasted.com/start here. Again, that's nothingiswasted.com/start here. And join me as a first step to taking back your story no matter what you've gone through. Now listen, there is very real pain and loss that is threatening to keep you discouraged and despairing, but it doesn't have to be that way. Let me give you some practical hope that I've learned in my own pain and suffering after losing my wife Amanda in 2015. I found that the only way out of despair is going right through it, and life is too short to stay in your pain. We don't want to waste this. So I want to invite you to join me for our next free live Zoom call by signing up at nothingiswasted.com/start here and let the healing journey begin in your life. nothingiswasted.com/start here.
So I think when I first started growing in my faith, I was still very much resistant to that whole side of me, the whole Korean side of me. And then I kind of came to a crossroads, like after college, like, you know, we were in full-time ministry at the time, or I was, I guess I should say. My husband and I weren't married yet. Working overseas and telling people that God loves them, you know, working with college students overseas. And in the back of my mind, and this crossroads that I was at kept coming to the forefront of my heart and my mind. And it was, do I really believe that? Because there's this whole part of me that's hidden, you know, that I'm not willing to face or embrace. And so if I'm telling people that God loves all of them, but I don't even know that, I haven't even experienced that fully yet because I'm not willing to embrace that part of myself, or even just, you know, bring it, like let's show up whole. And so I kept coming to that place, and it really led me down this long journey of, you know, looking back at scripture, seeing God meeting people in their pain, but also, you know, in identity crisis. Like one of the biggest ones was Moses for me, and just really seeing how God, you know, he doesn't just brush that aside and say, your identity is in Christ now, so none of that matters. You know, you can just erase it or just pretend like it's not there and be unified with others. It's, you know, no, he actually cares enough about all of those tiny details. One of the things that really got me was when God was, you know, telling Moses, like, that he is the son of, you know, this Hebrew father, like addressing his first family. It really struck me. And then there's a lot more to that, obviously, in his life of identity, you know. But I guess seeing God in that way, and then starting to bring myself to different situations, like when I was overseas making Korean food. No one knew how much of a big deal it was, but it was a really big deal for me. And then having community around that and feeling like, okay, God is very much in this, and I feel alive. Like I feel very alive in this situation, because this is who I was created to be, you know, and I'm bringing my whole self. So a number of those things where it was just so confirming that God was with me in such an intimate way. And down to all these details, and that he had always been with me. When I had looked back, even like when we weren't going to church as a family, thinking about the ways that he was pursuing me through TV, through so many things, through friends. And so I think just knowing him as Emmanuel, and not just with me, like in presence, but also in the details that, you know, he has intentionally and lovingly put in me. So that's kind of just changed everything. That's brought a lot of healing. That doesn't mean every situation is easy. There's tons of tensions in our world, and it's so hard, right? But it's brought a groundedness and an embrace that I didn't experience until I was an adult. So
that's what's so interesting about, we talked earlier about the church wanting your story not to be so messy and resolving it and stuff. And it's like our stories continue to go on until the day that we die. And so they're going to continue to be messy, right? There's just new faith steps that we take or new places of healing that we find and wholeness. But I love the distinction there that you just underscored, that this was a moment where you embraced it, right? Like that's like even further than just acceptance. Acceptance almost has this connotation of like, okay, well, I'm just going to, fine, I'll accept it, and almost a resentfulness within that acceptance, but embracing it, going, this is my story and this is who I am, and I'm going to embrace it. And I think that in and of itself is probably the basis for wholeness to take place more than anything else. Is just going, Lord, this is the life that you gave me. And rather than hiding or being resentful, I'm going to embrace that and see the beauty and the mystery within it. Yeah. And then where you are in it. Yeah. That's so cool. That's so cool. The, you share a little bit about, in the book, you shared, and you touched on it earlier, you alluded to it, but I want to, if you don't mind, I want to dive deeper into this. You talk about the kind of the healing journey between you and your mom. And I wonder what that's been like for you. I think a lot of people could probably relate to that. As we grow up, we begin to understand more about our family of origin, and there's the generational curses and sin cycles. And, we sit around with some of our small group and they're talking about, I'm discovering myself, and I'm discovering why I do certain things. And then it's having to sort through like not being resentful toward your parents about those particular things. You've got a unique story in that with trying to figure out where you belong, and, and that creating a little bit of, as you said, resentment before, but now you guys have really found some healing. What was that journey like to find that healing with each other?
Yeah. It was a lot of crying. With the hiding, I used to hide all emotion, which is so funny because I'm definitely like very feely, but it's a lot of crying. There was a moment where I was in a bookstore, and I wrote about it in the book, where I found this Korean cookbook, and it was talking about miyeoguk, which is seaweed soup. And my mom she had always tried to make it for me, and I never liked it. Or at least I just felt like it was too weird when I was younger. And it's something that Korean mothers give their Korean daughters when they give birth. It's supposed to be healing, after birth. And my mom made it for me, and I had a couple of sips. And then when she was gone, I dumped the whole thing down the drain, like just the whole pot. And I remember feeling a little bit guilty. But then when I found this cookbook, there was this whole spread about this soup and the significance of it. I'm standing in a Barnes and Noble. I think we're visiting, my husband's from California, so we're visiting his family, and I have a stroller, our firstborn is in the stroller, and I am weeping uncontrollably because it's like, I knew that it was special, but I think to read this woman who I didn't even know, right, talking about the significance of it and how it had been done for generations and generations, like thousands and thousands. And here I am dumping it down the drain, Wow. And so then later, I don't know if we talked about this, but later, our youngest is adopted from South Korea, actually. And so
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so when we went, and this was part of this whole process. So I think after that, I apologized to her, and I'm like calling her crying. I'm like, I'm sorry, I never ate this soup. She's like, oh my gosh, what is going on? So she's like, pull yourself together. You got to take care of your son. And then I tried to, just slowly would try to like have it if it was ever around, because I was like, I want to experience this. Maybe I'll decide that I don't really like it, but I've never even given it a chance, Yeah. And I liked Korean food then, but it was like the Korean food that everyone liked,
Right,
Anyway, so we're on the plane to go get
Korean barbecue.
Yeah, exactly. The stuff that seems normal. No.
Right.
So we're on the plane to get our daughter, and when you fly to Korea, if you fly Korean Air, it's like amazing, and the food, of course, is amazing. It's not like, I don't know, typical airplane food, but there was this bowl, and there was steam like coming out of just a crack of it, and I opened it, and it was the soup, and it was really, I don't know, it was this moment where I was like, this is your time, this is our third kid. We're adopting her. It's a totally different way of bringing her into our family, and this is something that you need to fully ingest, because now you're moving even closer to Korea, because she is Korean, fully Korean, and you're not going to like erase that, in any way like you did with yourself. And so this is all the stuff going on in my head. So I just remember I had this moment where I'm drinking, like just guzzling it down, even though I don't think Koreans usually lift up the bowl, but I just guzzled it down. And it very much felt like the spiritual experience with the Lord, and even healing with my mom wasn't there. But it felt like there was something that God needed to do in me, even for us, her and our relationship. So that changed things a little bit. And I think it's more of a, when she's offering something, I am receiving it in a different way, and kind of like how you talked about the difference between acceptance and embrace. It's kind of living that out now. And it doesn't mean our relationship is perfect, but it's different. It's definitely different.
Yeah. So. Tasha, that's beautiful. Wow. What an incredible, like, visceral experience.
Yeah.
To be on an airplane on the way over to South Korea and take that moment to commemorate. Yeah. It's like God just goes, whew. I love the fact that God does that, right? Yes, he absolutely shows up when we're sitting down in our quiet time and reading our Bible, of course, right? But there's some really cool moments where he shows up in this very kinesthetic way, where it's like we're just on the journey and it just hits us. And we're like, it's almost the very opposite of a trigger in some ways. Like it's it's like this healing trigger where he's like, hey, step into this, embrace this, and there's going to be something really visceral that happens. Yeah.
It felt really so cool. Merciful, like just, that, after all that I had been like and acted like just so merciful and so kind. And just, it's like he has so much belief in us that, we can move towards wholeness and to receiving our belovedness,
Wow.
So,
wow. Yeah. So cool. Well, one of the things I was thinking about this in the middle of our conversation that, and maybe I'm being presumptuous, but, I think one of the errors that we make as white Americans is just to like not listen and hear what our brothers and sisters that are quote unquote minorities in our midst that they're saying. And so I know I'm making a little bit more of this than what I should. I should just ask the question. But as we close, I just want to know if there's anything else that you want to say. Like, I just want to give you that voice. Is there anything else that you're like, hey, I just to be seen and understood and help other people feel seen and understood? What else would you want us to know?
Something I say in the book is that our stories were made to matter to one another. And so I think that as we look at our communities, as we look at the things that we read, obviously I write books, so books are on my mind, but this is, in your kids' communities all around you, like I think it's really important to ask what's missing. Not that we can all go find everything that's missing, but just to ask the question and let God answer that. I think there are stories that are missing in all of our lives, and that when we move towards them, we are doing something very sacred and very much in line with what God does. So I would just say not to be afraid to ask that question, and to really think about what it means if our stories are meant to matter to one another. What that means in light of what's going on in our world right now, in light of what's going on in our nation, in our community, in our neighborhood, on the neighborhood app, what is that? How does that impact, how we respond to those things?
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. Tasha, this has been wonderful. I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to pick up Tell Me the Dream again, Reflections on Family, Ethnicity, and the Sacred Work of Belonging. And so if you have enjoyed this conversation, you're going to really enjoy this book. Tasha dives a lot deeper into some of the things that we've talked about and more. And so we'll make sure that we put that in the show notes, and we'll put it on the podcast page there so you guys can access that really easily. But Tasha, thank you so much. This has been just a wonderful time to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everyone who's listening.
Well, Tasha Jun is like my secret best friend. She doesn't know it.
She doesn't.
I'm coming for you, Tasha.
Oh, goodness. I'm telling you, recently Chrissy and I have been talking a lot about her South Korean roots. And I told you this when we were off air, but her mom, if you've listened to Christy's story, in episode 100 of the Nothing is Wasted podcast, she shares a bit of it. And you would have picked up that her mom was adopted out of an orphanage in Seoul, South Korea. So she was left at a doorstep when she was a baby and then grew up in this orphanage until she was 10 and adopted by an American family, brought into the United States. And her mom's just the sweetest lady ever. I mean, just she literally just left our house right now. Just the sweet servant-hearted. I mean, I don't know what I would do without her mom. She's just so precious. But because of her, because she doesn't know much about her heritage, because of her
mom being adopted,
story. So we've just started having conversations like we want to go over to Seoul, or we want to try to figure out if there's any family members that we can, So we're. Christy's mentioned this to me like 3 times in the past 2 days. So I'm like, I think we probably need to figure this out.
And I told you, like, I want to go this is not a meaningful reason, but I'm a huge K-drama fan. Like, all I watch is Korean dramas on Netflix. Literally, I mean, I'm not joking. That's all I watch. So I just want to like selfishly go with you. But to be serious,
let's do Nothing is Wasted trip
I
to
love it.
Seoul, South Korea.
But to make it serious, that's similar to Tasha's story. Like her, I don't know, I don't want to ruin the book for people, but a lot of her story was some of the family history was gone, and her having to kind of reconnect with her Koreanness when a lot of the past was lost. So I could understand Christy's desire to go there and explore where she's from. I think that matters. I think that's so important.
Well, there's something that is so pivotal in terms of like this idea of belonging and when you know your story, when you know where you've come from, when it's a mystery, you can feel very orphaned, right? Even if okay, this is my family of origin and it's bad, I'm not proud of it, right? You still feel like there's something concrete there.
Yeah, right.
But when it's a mystery, it's like I don't even know.
Yeah, it's like your foundation's off, your footing's off. Like where am I from? Where do I come from? What are the stories I carry with me in my body and in my blood and in my skin and in my I think that's right. I think that's really intriguing and important work to do.
Yeah, Tasha talks a lot about this idea of collective lament, and particularly dealing with race. I mean,
racism.
We talked about this, back in 2020 when we were walking through the George Floyd thing. We've had multiple guests since then to talk really about both racial trauma and collective lament surrounding racism. We've not talked from this angle of, Asian American
hate.
Yeah, exactly. But that's one of the things you really talk quite a bit about. Especially in the Louder Song and some things that some of your other writing and teaching that you do, Aubrey, is this idea of mourning collectively, which is
biblical, and I think that's maybe like, unfortunately, the conversation, the anti-racism conversation, has been co-opted by politics, and therefore I think Christians who have been called by God to do anti-racist work don't. Unfortunately, because they think they're being partisan or bipartisan or what have you. And I think that's an attack of the enemy. I think that's the enemy keeping Christians from collectively mourning and grieving and fighting for justice in ways that really are godly and beautiful and good. And lament, I mean, people probably at Nothing is Wasted heard me give my lament talk. Lament is simply... scripturally, it's called an impolite plea. We see it all throughout the Bible. Lament is crying out to God with impolite, difficult questions. And the concept behind biblical lament is that God is the judge, meaning God is the only arbiter of justice who is fair. And therefore, in lament, we cry out to the only judge who can do something about the injustice we see in this world, experience in this world. And especially, I'm going to talk for those of us in power, and for those of us in primarily white spaces, we need to take that charge seriously on behalf of our brothers and sisters who are minorities in this country. And that doesn't mean we do it as white saviors. Absolutely not. That's a mistake. That's the opposite of lament. But to say, I'm going to carry your pain with me, and it's going to matter to me. I'm going to hear your story, and I'm going to learn from it. And then I'm going to go to the judge who can do something about it with you. Like, together as brothers and sisters, we are going to cry out before God and ask for something to change in this nation, in our worlds, in our communities, in our churches. And that's so biblical. Like, I think that's what people don't understand, is that's what every prophetic lament throughout scripture was, a collective lament. We're so individual in the West in our faith, and that matters. This is what Nothing is Wasted about. Like, God meets us in our individual pain and our heartache. But biblical lament, just like the biblical faith, is meant to happen collectively and communally
together.
And so when you're reading laments throughout Psalm 13, when you're reading the book of Lamentations, when you're reading Jeremiah's lament, when you're reading, I guess that's Lamentations, but other laments in scripture, that is the lamenting prophet lamenting on behalf of hurting people. Right, and so it's biblical to join with people who are hurting and cry out collectively. And that might look like you're doing a prayer march through your city against racism. Yeah. That might mean that your church is holding a night of lament where you just cry out to God together and sing hard songs and listen to hard stories and ask for God to do something. That might mean just a posture of listening to those who have been the butt of, especially the Asian American population since 2020, like the butt of just awful violence that we cannot stand before God and be okay with. Right. Anyway, I'm very passionate about lament. I could talk about this forever, but I just think I think we've been malformed and misled to believe that lament is the opposite of faith, when actually lament is part of the historical Orthodox global faith, Church of Jesus, and has been forever. And Jesus himself lamented. So it's a beautiful way to invite God to meet us in our heartache and in our pain. And those of us who carry grief, and most of our Nothing is Wasted listeners, we know you have walked through grief, or you're walking with somebody with grief, to be able to know that we have a God that's so compassionate and so good and so kind, that he wants not just our praises and our thanksgivings, but also our heartache and our cries for change. Like, God wants those things. That's and ultimately it's the Lord who will do something about it, because our God is a God of restoration. Our God is a God of healing. And I also think that there's a gospel, those of us, especially in the States, who have been in, primarily majority culture spaces, there's a gospel from the minorities in this country that we need to hear and learn from. So that our vision of who God is can be expanded.
That's so good. We, how many times in scripture does it say the Lord heard their cry? Yes. The Hebrew word for that is the zedekah, which is like a cry for justice, a cry, a plead for to show mercy. Like, would you, and it's just, God listens to the collective cry of his people.
Yeah, he does.
We see that all throughout scripture, and I think it's really, I don't want to say this and cause anybody to feel any kind of shame or judgment, but I think one of the reasons that we struggle with understanding how or feeling comfortable with lamenting collectively is because we don't know how to lament personally.
Totally, Davey. Totally.
It's similar to like prayer. Again, this is the part where I don't want anybody to feel shame. But I think that if you recognize, man, I feel uncomfortable praying with a group of people. I want you to ask the question: how comfortable are you praying by yourself?
Yeah, that's good.
Alone.
Yeah.
Right. It may not be 1-to-1. Right. You may just be a very shy, introverted person,
which is
but
great.
you have an unbelievably robust prayer life. That's fine.
Right.
But a lot of the times, the reason somebody doesn't feel comfortable praying around other people is because they're struggling to pray alone. Right. And so let that be that, really work in that private lament in your own life, in the private prayer closet, and then recognize that there are these times where God has called us together to do this, to cry out to him. Right. And it might not even be your own crisis. It's could very well be on behalf of somebody else or someone else's crisis. And this is what we're called to carry each other's burdens. Right. Exactly what you were saying. Right, Daniel Brooker gave me this incredible, like he says this all the time when we do our widower retreats. And I think it's pervasive to this concept right here, where he says, hey, I'm not going to tell you that it's going to be okay. I want to walk with you until you can say it yourself.
Wow.
And when you think about that is that's carrying someone else's burden.
Yeah.
And that's on the side of, someone in your life who's going through a difficult time, but also, listen, in our minority brothers and sisters, to say, I'm not just going to be like, hey, listen, it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine, right? Because I have some kind of discomfort or some kind of ignorance toward your situation and I don't know how to respond. Everything's going to be fine. You know, there's laws being passed. There's things that, you know, no. It's not okay.
Yeah.
And I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to learn and I'm going to ask questions of curiosity until you can say
it's okay. You tell me when it's
hey, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
That's so good.
So anyways, it's just something I can tell, Aubrey, you're extremely passionate about this.
Really
I love that. I absolutely love that. And here's why I love that. I love that because, so here's the deal. Like, let me tell you observationally, it would make a whole lot of sense that you would be passionate about, which I know that you are, women in ministry, right? Like that's another one of your like, it's like, I'm so passionate. You have this holy discontent for like the suppression of women leadership in ministry all throughout history, right? That would make a lot of sense. Here's what's beautiful about the passion that you carry for someone else in this is this isn't your burden, right? It's not your situation, right? You are a majority person. But you're like, man, because of the work that you guys are doing at Renewal, because of the people that the friendships that you have, you're like, oh my gosh, no, this is not right. And you're beginning to carry that burden. And so I think that's what's most important for all of us. If you're like, well, I don't know if I'm carrying that kind of empathy. Well, who are you surrounding yourself with?
Proximity is so important in these conversations. Yeah.
You know, and the other thing I'll say is this, and we don't need to get off on this, but we can have another conversation at some point about this. But there are political conversations that are starting to stir up because we're getting into that season, aren't we? And primaries are coming down the pipe. And so here's the deal. As Christians, we have often, like what you said, backed away from the things we know that are absolutely true and right and biblical, that are from God's eyes, this is not right, because we're afraid that we're going to, because of that, get lumped into some kind of
category.
Right? Because this is the party's line about certain things. And so if I associate myself with one of those things, all of a sudden now I'm in that camp, right? And I just want to say on behalf of Nothing Is Wasted, that there are going to be things that you and I right now will agree on and disagree on, both from a Republican standpoint and a Democratic standpoint and everything in between.
Yes, totally.
And it is okay to find that nuance, to go, hey, I stand with what would typically be considered a Democratic stance on this particular issue, while I stand on this issue over here.
Yeah.
And so the reality is like we've got to walk in this nuance and walk with each other and have healthy discourse.
That's exactly right. And remember that our citizenship is heaven and our King is Jesus. You know,
That's it.
You and I will have to talk about this again, but I just think like
we'll
let's remember who we serve and who we belong to.
Politics series. How about that?
Really good. Whoa.
Oh,
all right, Davey. We love our conversations like the one with Tasha.
That's
Most of all, we love walking with you to partner with God to take back your story.
Right.
And so we always just want to invite you to go to our website, nothingiswasted.com, to check out our community platform, our Community Plus platform. There we have all kinds of resources for you, from coaching to content to courses, all the C's. What else do we say? Creativity. I don't know. We have all kinds of things, because we just want to fill up your soul, especially if you're in a season of pain and heartache, to know that you're not alone and God is with you. We also want to thank Sleeping at Last for providing all of the music for the Nothing Is Wasted podcast. You can stream, download, listen to his music wherever it is you find your music.
That's right. You can follow us on Instagram at Nothing Is Wasted Ministries. You can follow me at Davey Blackburn, and you can follow Aubrey at ObSamp. And we want to invite you to join us next week. We are having a conversation with Kobe Campbell. Just an incredible conversation, especially when you're trying to work through, breaking out of cycles, healing from trauma. It's just, she released a book called Why Am I Like This? How to Break Cycles, Heal from Trauma, and Restore Your Faith. Good. And so it's an incredible book. She's an incredible person, writer. This is an incredible interview. So go ahead and listen to my conversation, or a clip from my conversation with Kobe Campbell.
but God moves in spontaneity. We see that in the life of Jesus. Jesus does not just plan to go places. He goes places and someone brings a child. He was walking and he sees someone being carried away. Jesus operates in spontaneity, and the Holy Spirit operates in spontaneity, and that requires our yielding and our consistent attention. Yes. And so I've said this to pastors and leaders, is like, the Holy Spirit's going to move regardless, you know, and if he wants to heal in the temple, and if you won't make space for it, he'll do it in a therapist's office. And that's literally what's happened. Is like, what's actually interesting is there was like a move probably 2-3 years ago. I've talked to a couple of therapist friends where a lot of pastors were coming to therapy. A lot of ministry leaders were like, I can't get this from my church. So I, like the church I'm serving at, the church I'm leading, so I am going to go to a therapist's office. And so, but I would say to them, how would I put this? In the year of our Lord, 2023, we have not exhausted the ways in which God can manifest his power. And we have to stop thinking that we have reached the end of understanding of how an infinite God can move. An infinite God can heal infinitely. An infinite God can move infinitely. If he's used a rock and a donkey and, the least expected people, he can and will move in ways that are unexpected. And if we want to rest in the certainty of what we think should and shouldn't happen, we're going to miss it. And I say this because I see a lot of people who are committed to the idea of Christianity, but resistant to the movement of Christ.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.